Dr. Lisa Carter held her baby boy Tommy close to her chest as the bright blue lights buzzed overhead in the alien medical room. The cold metal walls seemed to close in around them. Her heart broke every time she looked at the empty spaces where her research team used to be. Her husband David was gone. Dr. Johnson was gone. All of them had died screaming when the gray-skinned aliens injected them with their so-called improvement drugs. Now it was Tommy's turn. At only 6 months old, he couldn't even crawl yet, but the Velthari aliens thought his young brain might be different. They believed human babies could handle their experiments better than grown-ups. Lisa wanted to scream, to fight, to run away with her son, but the energy chains around her wrists kept her locked in place. The lead alien scientist, Velkar, moved around Tommy like a hungry spider. His long, thin fingers held needles filled with glowing liquid. His gray skin looked like wet concrete, and when he was angry, it would ripple and move like water. Lisa had learned to fear those ripples. This human child will succeed where the adults failed, Velkar said in his cold, emotionless voice. Young neural pathways are more flexible, more accepting of change. For 93 days, Lisa watched her baby boy suffer. Every morning, the aliens would take Tommy from her arms. Every evening, they would bring him back, but he seemed a little more distant each time. The experiments were changing him in ways she couldn't understand. Tommy's cries filled the medical bay day after day. The sound echoed off the metal walls and made Lisa feel like her heart was being torn apart. She sang lullabies to him when they brought him back, trying to remind him that he was loved, that he was human, that he wasn't just some lab rat for these monsters to play with. The other prisoners in nearby cells tried to offer comfort, but there wasn't much anyone could say. They were all trapped in this nightmare together. Some days, Lisa heard the aliens dragging away people who had died from the experiments. She always wondered if tomorrow would be Tommy's turn. But Tommy was stronger than the aliens expected. While other test subjects died within days, he kept surviving. His little body seemed to adapt to each new injection, each new modification. The aliens were excited by this at first. They thought they had finally found the perfect test subject. Then something changed. After 3 months of torture, Tommy suddenly stopped crying during the experiments. He would just lie there, staring at nothing with empty blue eyes. He wouldn't smile when Lisa held him. He wouldn't laugh at her funny faces. He barely even moved. Lisa tried everything to reach her son. She would hold him for hours, singing every song she knew. She would talk to him about Earth, about the park where they used to take walks, about his grandparents who loved him so much. But Tommy just stared at the ceiling like he couldn't hear her anymore. The aliens ran test after test, but Tommy's responses got weaker and weaker. Velkar grew frustrated. His gray skin rippled more often now, showing his anger and disappointment. The subject shows no signs of successful integration, he told his assistant one day. Brain activity remains minimal. Physical responses are declining. This experiment has failed. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine when she heard those words. She knew what happened to failed experiments. Prepare the disposal transport, Velkar ordered. Send both specimens to Waste Moon 7. Let them rot with the other failures. The next day, alien guards roughly grabbed Lisa and Tommy, dragging them toward a small, beat-up spaceship. Lisa held Tommy tight, whispering promises that everything would be okay, even though she knew they were probably going to die. The transport ship was old and barely functional. It shook and rattled as it flew through space toward the waste moon. Lisa looked out the small window and saw a gray, rocky world covered in garbage and wreckage from other failed experiments. Then the engines failed. The ship spun out of control and crashed hard into the moon's surface. Lisa used her body to protect Tommy as metal bent and glass shattered around them. In her final moments, she looked at her son one last time. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," she whispered. But when the dust settled, tiny Tommy was still breathing. His small chest moved up and down steadily. Something deep inside his modified cells was already working to keep him alive in ways that would have amazed even the aliens who created him. 3 days had passed since the crash, and baby Tommy lay motionless in the twisted wreckage of the alien transport ship. His tiny body should have died from the cold, from hunger, from the thin air of this forgotten moon. But something inside him kept working, kept his heart beating even when everything else seemed hopeless. Deep beneath the rocky surface of the moon, ancient beings felt the crash through vibrations in their crystal caves. They had been sleeping in the depths for thousands of years, watching the universe change above them. These weren't ordinary creatures. The Kethmori looked like the dragons from old Earth stories, but they were made of living crystal that caught and reflected light in amazing ways. Their scales shimmered like stars, and their eyes held wisdom older than most planets. Elder Thane was the first to wake up completely. He was massive, even by Kethmori standards, with crystal scales that glowed soft blue in the darkness. When he moved through the tunnels, his footsteps sounded like wind chimes. He had been alive for over 5,000 years and had seen many civilizations grow up and disappear. Something new has arrived, Thane told the other elders as they gathered in the great crystal chamber. Something that doesn't belong with the usual garbage the Grey Ones dump here. The younger Kethmori wanted to ignore it. They had learned long ago that getting involved with other species usually led to trouble. But Thane felt something different this time. His ancient instincts told him this was important. So he made the long journey up through the winding caves to the moon's surface. The climb took him almost a full day, passing through crystal formations that had grown over millions of years. When he finally reached the crash site, he found exactly what he expected to find and something he never could have imagined. The adult human was dead, just like all the other failed experiments the aliens had dumped here over the years. But the tiny human child was still alive. Not just alive, but changing. Thane's crystal eyes could see things that normal eyes couldn't. He could see the energy patterns flowing through living beings, and this child's energy was unlike anything he had ever seen. Where the cruel aliens had seen a broken experiment, Thane saw a miracle happening. The baby wasn't dying from their modifications. Instead, his human DNA was slowly accepting and improving the alien changes. It was like watching two different types of music learn to play together in perfect harmony. Tommy's small body was adapting in ways that should have been impossible. His brain was rewiring itself to handle new abilities. His muscles were becoming stronger while staying perfectly human. Most amazing of all, his natural human creativity and adaptability were working together with the alien enhancements to create something completely new. Incredible, Thane whispered, his voice sounding like distant thunder. The small ones never understand what they're truly doing. He carefully picked up Tommy, holding the baby in his massive crystal claws as gently as if he were made of glass. Tommy opened his eyes and looked directly at the ancient dragon. Instead of crying or being scared, the baby just stared with curious, intelligent eyes that seemed far too aware for someone so young. Thane carried Tommy down into the crystal caves, calling for the other elders to witness what he had found. The great council chamber filled with dozens of Kethmori, their crystal bodies creating a rainbow of colors as they reflected light from the glowing cave walls. This child is not what the Grey Ones intended to create, Thane explained to the gathering. They tried to force their cold perfection onto human adaptability, but they failed to understand what they were really doing. This little one carries the best of both worlds. Human heart and alien enhancement, working together instead of fighting each other. The council debated for hours. Some argued that they should stay hidden as they always had. Others worried that raising an alien child would bring unwanted attention to their secret home. But Thane's wisdom eventually convinced them all. We have watched civilizations destroy themselves with their cruelty for too long, he said. Perhaps it's time we helped guide one toward something better. So the Kethmori took Tommy as their own. They created a special chamber filled with soft crystal formations that glowed with warm, gentle light. They learned to prepare human food and found ways to keep the baby comfortable and happy. As Tommy grew from a baby into a toddler, the ancient dragons became his teachers. They showed him how to be patient, how to think before acting, how to see the bigger picture instead of just reacting to immediate problems. They taught him their language, which sounded like singing crystal bells, and shared stories of all the wonders they had seen across the galaxy. But most importantly, they never tried to change what made Tommy human. They encouraged his curiosity, his laughter, his natural desire to explore and learn. They helped him understand his growing abilities without losing touch with his human heart. 15 years had passed since Elder Thane first carried baby Tommy into the crystal caves. Now the child had grown into a young man who stood almost 6 feet tall, with lean muscles and sharp features that somehow managed to look both strong and gentle at the same time. His brown hair had grown long, and he often tied it back while training with the Kethmori elders. Tommy had become something amazing during those years in the Dragon Caves. He could touch electronic devices and understand how they worked just by feeling the energy flowing through them. When he concentrated, he could lift objects that weighed hundreds of pounds without breaking a sweat. He moved through the crystal tunnels with a fluid grace that made it seem like he was dancing instead of walking. But what made the Kethmori most proud wasn't his physical abilities. Tommy had kept his human heart through everything. He still laughed at silly jokes. He still asked endless questions about everything around him. He still felt deep sadness when he thought about the mother he barely remembered and the father he had never really known. The crystal caves had become his whole world. He knew every tunnel, every glowing formation, every hiding spot where the younger Kethmori liked to play. The ancient dragons had taught him their history, their philosophy, and their deep understanding of how the universe really worked. He could speak their crystal chime language as easily as the English his mother had whispered to him as a baby. Tommy spent his days learning from different elders. Elder Kira taught him patience by showing him how crystals grew over thousands of years, one tiny layer at a time. Elder Zeph taught him strategy through complex games that required thinking dozens of moves ahead. Elder NYX taught him to feel the energy patterns that connected all living things across the galaxy. But his favorite teacher was still Elder Thane, who had become like a father to him. Every evening, they would sit together in Thane's private chamber, a beautiful cave filled with crystals that showed images from across the galaxy. Thane would tell Tommy stories about different worlds, different peoples, and the rise and fall of great civilizations. Remember, young one, Thane would often say, power without wisdom leads to destruction. But wisdom without the courage to act leads to nothing at all. Tommy thought he understood what Thane meant, but he had never really been tested. His life in the caves was peaceful and safe. He had never seen real cruelty or suffering except in the stories the elders told him. That all changed on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Tommy was practicing his energy manipulation in the deep caves when he heard Thane calling for him with unusual urgency. He rushed to the observation chamber, where the crystal walls could show images from anywhere in the galaxy. What he saw there made his blood run cold. Haven Station was under attack. The peaceful trading hub where dozens of different species lived and worked together was being torn apart by Velthari warships. Tommy watched in horror as families ran screaming through the corridors while gray-skinned alien soldiers hunted them down. The worst part was what happened next. The Velthari weren't just killing people. They were capturing them, dragging crying children away from their parents, loading entire families onto transport ships headed for their research facilities. Tommy knew exactly what that meant. These innocent people were about to become test subjects, just like he had been as a baby. No, 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 Tommy whispered, pressing his hands against the crystal wall as if he could somehow reach through it to help. His enhanced vision let him see details that would have been invisible to normal eyes. He saw a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5 years old, screaming for her mother as Velthari soldiers carried her away. He saw an elderly man trying to protect his grandchildren, only to be knocked unconscious and dragged onto a ship. Tommy's fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles went white. The energy fields around him started to fluctuate wildly as his emotions spiraled out of control. Crystals throughout the chamber began to glow brighter and brighter as they absorbed his rage. That's when Thane found him. The ancient dragon entered the chamber quietly, his massive crystal form radiating calm and wisdom. He looked at the images on the wall, then at Tommy's furious face, and nodded slowly. I have been waiting 15 years for this moment, Thane said, his voice like distant thunder. The moment when you would truly understand what you are meant to become. Tommy turned to face his foster father, and Thane could see something new in the young man's eyes. The innocent curiosity was still there, but now it was mixed with something darker and more determined. It was the look of someone who had finally seen enough suffering to know that hiding wasn't an option anymore. They're doing to those families exactly what they did to me, Tommy said, his voice shaking with controlled fury. Those children are going to go through what I went through. Their parents are going to die watching their kids suffer, just like my mother did. Thane moved closer, his crystal scales chiming softly. The time for hiding ends now, my son. Your mother's people need their guardian. They need someone who understands both human courage and cosmic wisdom. They need the ghost that the Grey Ones created without realizing what they were doing. Tommy looked back at the wall, where the attack on Haven Station was still continuing. Somewhere deep inside him, he felt something awakening that had been sleeping since he was a baby. Not just his enhanced abilities, but his purpose. His reason for existing. Then it's time they met what their experiments really created, he said quietly. Tommy's first mission began 3 days after watching the attack on Haven Station. He had spent those days planning with Elder Thane, studying Velthari technology patterns, and preparing his mind for what he was about to do. The ancient dragon had given him one final piece of advice before he left the crystal caves. Remember, young one, you are not like them. You do not destroy for the sake of destruction. You heal what they have broken. Tommy's target was Kepler Station, a massive research facility orbiting a dead planet. According to Kethmori intelligence networks, over 300 prisoners were being held there, all of them failed experiments that the Velthari kept alive for further testing. Most had been there for years, slowly losing hope as their bodies were changed against their will. Getting to the station was easier than Tommy had expected. His enhanced abilities let him survive in the vacuum of space for short periods, and his understanding of energy fields meant he could make small ships invisible to sensors. He approached Kepler Station like a ghost, floating silently through the darkness until he reached the outer hull. The moment Tommy touched the station's metal surface, he could feel everything. The electrical systems, the computer networks, the life support systems, even the security cameras. It was like the entire station became part of his nervous system. He could sense every heartbeat inside, every frightened prisoner, every cruel guard. He started in the security center. Tommy simply walked through the corridors, his presence somehow unnoticed by the cameras. When guards did see him, they only caught glimpses before he disappeared around corners or through vents that should have been too small for a human. The few who tried to raise alarms found their communication devices playing old Earth music instead of sending emergency signals. In the main security room, Tommy placed his hand on the central computer. The machine's cold alien interface suddenly became warm and friendly. Instead of tracking prisoners for punishment, it began tracking them for rescue. Security doors that had kept people trapped for years suddenly opened. Force fields that had caused pain now provided gentle healing energy. The first prisoner Tommy found was a woman named Beth from a human colony ship. She had been at Kepler Station for 2 years, and the experiments had changed her in ways that made her ashamed of her own appearance. Her skin had turned partially translucent, and she could see energy patterns around living beings. "They told me I was broken," Beth whispered when Tommy found her in her cell. "They said the modifications failed because I couldn't control what I was seeing." Tommy smiled and showed her how his own eyes could see energy fields. "You're not broken," he said gently. "You're just learning to see the universe the way it really is. That's not a failure, that's a gift." Within 12 minutes of entering Kepler Station, Tommy had freed all 300 prisoners. But he didn't just unlock their cells and leave. He spent time with each group, showing them how to understand and control their new abilities. The woman who could phase through walls learned she wasn't a monster, she was free from all physical barriers. The man whose enhanced hearing had driven him nearly insane learned to filter and focus his new senses. When the Velthari reinforcements arrived, they found an empty station filled with the sound of human laughter and music. Every computer system had been reprogrammed to help rather than harm. The medical equipment that once tortured prisoners now worked as healing devices that any species could use safely. Tommy's next target was Titan Base, a genetic research facility hidden in an asteroid field. This time, he didn't just free the prisoners. He transformed the entire facility into something beautiful. The cold, sterile laboratories became warm medical centers where former test subjects could heal from their trauma. The machines that had been used to force painful changes onto unwilling victims now helped beings understand and embrace the modifications they had received. The most amazing transformation happened in the main research lab. Tommy touched the central genetic modification machine and it began creating music instead of serums. The complex mathematical formulas that the Velthari used to calculate genetic perfection started showing up as beautiful light patterns on the walls. Word of these impossible rescues spread through the underground networks that connected oppressed peoples across the galaxy. They started calling him the Ghost of the Abandoned, a mysterious figure who could turn the Velthari's own weapons against them and disappear without a trace. Supreme Commander Velkar, the same alien who had experimented on Tommy as a baby, received reports of these incidents with growing rage. His gray skin rippled constantly now as he studied surveillance footage that showed corridors empty 1 second and full of freed prisoners the next. "This is impossible," Velkar hissed to his assistants. "Our calculations are perfect. Our security systems are flawless. How can one being cause such chaos?" But that was exactly the problem. The Velthari had built their entire empire on predictable perfection. Every system they designed followed logical patterns. Every security measure had mathematical solutions. They couldn't understand someone who fought with pure human creativity enhanced by ancient wisdom. Tommy didn't follow their rules because he had learned from beings who were older than their civilization. He didn't think like a soldier because the Keth Mori had taught him to think like an artist. Every mission was like painting a picture or composing a song, using whatever materials he found to create something beautiful from something ugly. Each successful rescue sent waves of hope through the enslaved worlds. Former prisoners became teachers, showing others that their forced modifications could be gifts instead of curses. The rigid Velthari Empire, built on fear and control, began to crack as their victims learned to see themselves as survivors instead of failures. And somewhere in the crystal caves of a forgotten moon, Elder Thane watched the reports with ancient pride, knowing that the small human child he had rescued 15 years ago was finally becoming the guardian the galaxy needed. The final battle wasn't going to be fought with weapons or armies. Tommy had learned enough from Elder Thane to know that real change happened in hearts and minds, not on battlefields. So when he decided to face the Velthari Empire one last time, he chose the most important day in their calendar, the Grand Symposium of Genetic Purity. Every year, the greatest Velthari scientists gathered on their homeworld to celebrate their achievements in forced evolution. They would display their most successful experiments, share their latest discoveries, and plan new ways to make other species perfect according to their cold standards. This year's symposium was especially important because Supreme Commander Velkar had promised to finally capture the ghost of the abandoned. Tommy's journey to the Velthari homeworld took 2 weeks. He traveled in a small ship that Elder Thane had helped him modify, using Kethmori crystal technology to stay hidden from enemy sensors. As he flew through space, he thought about his mother Lisa, who had died protecting him. He thought about all the prisoners he had freed, and all the ones he hadn't been able to save yet. Most of all, he thought about the choice he was about to make. The Velthari capital city was exactly what Tommy expected: cold, grey, and perfectly organized. Every building was the same height, every street followed geometric patterns, every citizen wore identical clothing. It was a place where individuality had been erased in favor of calculated efficiency. As his ship approached the landing zone, alarms immediately began wailing across the entire city. Tommy smiled as he walked down the ship's ramp. Velthari security forces surrounded him within seconds, their energy weapons charged and ready. But he didn't run or fight. He simply walked through their ranks like he was taking a pleasant stroll through a park. When they fired at him, the energy beams somehow missed or bounced harmlessly away. When they tried to tackle him, they found themselves gently pushed aside by invisible forces. The Grand Assembly Hall was the largest building in the city, a massive pyramid made of black metal and glass. Inside, over 1,000 of the Empire's finest scientists had gathered to hear presentations about their latest experiments. They were discussing new ways to modify alien DNA when Tommy walked calmly through the main entrance. Security guards rushed to stop him, but their weapons wouldn't work properly. Their communication devices started playing children's lullabies instead of sending alerts. Their energy restraints transformed into colorful ribbons that fluttered harmlessly to the floor. Supreme Commander Velkar stood at the center of the Great Hall, his gray skin rippling with fury as he recognized the young human who had been haunting his empire for months. "Impossible," he hissed. "The failed experiment from 15 years ago. You should have died on that waste moon." Tommy looked around at the assembled scientists, these beings who had built their entire civilization on the idea that they could improve other species by force. Many of them had never seen a human before, and they stared at him with curious, calculating eyes. "I did die on that moon," Tommy said, his voice somehow carrying to every corner of the massive hall without any amplification. "The baby you experimented on died. But something new was born from that death. Something you never intended to create." More security forces poured into the hall, surrounding Tommy with dozens of weapons. Energy cannons, plasma rifles, molecular disruptors, enough firepower to level a city block. But Tommy just smiled and knelt down to touch the floor with his bare hand. What happened next would be remembered across the galaxy for generations. The moment Tommy's palm made contact with the cold metal floor, waves of change rippled outward in all directions. The sterile assembly hall began to transform in ways that defied every law of physics the Velthari understood. The metal walls sprouted flowering vines that glowed with soft, warm light. The energy weapons in the guards' hands reshaped themselves into musical instruments that began playing gentle melodies. The computer screens that had been showing charts about genetic modification now displayed beautiful artwork created by the species the Velthari had experimented on. But the most amazing change was in the building itself. The cold, calculated architecture began flowing like water, reshaping itself into something organic and alive. Crystalline formations grew from the ceiling, similar to the ones in Tommy's childhood home but somehow more colorful and musical. The air itself seemed to become lighter and easier to breathe. "You called me a failure 15 years ago," Tommy said to Velkar, who was backing away in horror as his perfect assembly hall transformed around him. "You threw me away because I didn't match your calculations. But you created exactly what the galaxy needed." The Velthari scientists watched in fascination and terror as their most advanced technology became something beautiful instead of functional. Some tried to run, but found that the doors had become gardens that welcomed them to stay and learn. Others tried to call for help, but their communication devices were now creating poetry in languages from across the galaxy. Tommy stood in the center of it all, no longer looking like the broken baby who had been dumped on a waste moon. He looked like what he had always been meant to become, a bridge between human creativity and cosmic wisdom, between individual growth and collective harmony. Evolution isn't about perfection, he continued, his words somehow broadcasting beyond the hall to every corner of the Velthari homeworld. It's about possibility. It's about choosing to become something better while still being yourself. You tried to force change, but real change comes from within. In the sky above the capital city, massive crystal ships began descending through the clouds. The Keth Mori had come not as conquerors, but as teachers, ready to help any being who wanted to learn the difference between forced improvement and chosen growth. Tommy's message spread across communication networks to every world in the galaxy: the age of forced perfection is over. The age of chosen growth begins now. Everyone gets to decide who they want to become. The experiment had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams, creating not a perfect soldier or a flawless specimen, but something much more valuable: hope.